Good morning, Kim Hammer, pastor, Saline Baptist Church down in Tull, with your morning devotion taken from the book of Genesis, chapter 3. We find that Moses has gone out to tend to the flock of the sheep of his father Jethro, and he's worked his way around to a mountain called Horeb, otherwise known as the Mountain of God. And the reason it's known as the Mountain of God, we'll find out in just a second. This is where Moses met with God for the first time, and God gave Moses some very specific instructions that we're going to look at today. Now, the Bible says in verse 4, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, and he called his name twice. And he said, Moses, Moses. In other words, he was double emphasizing that he wanted Moses' undivided attention. And Moses said, here am I. And I wonder at this time, did Moses really know who he was talking to at the time? Or was he just answering to the voice in a bush? Well, it became clear in the next few verses, because the Bible says, God said, do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face, and he was afraid to look at God. In this moment, it became clear that Moses was having an encounter with God. It was because he was listening intently to what he was saying, but it was also because God was coming to him in an unusual manner, unusual method, something that he hadn't witnessed before. It's not every day that a bush would catch on fire in the desert and not be consumed, that it would just stand there or just stay there and burn and burn and burn. But God uses in order to get Moses' attention so that he could give him a very important message. I think sometimes God uses the unusual in life in order to separate us from the normal that we just take for granted in order to get our attention. And he might use various means. Now, he hasn't used a burning bush that I know of around here recently, but that doesn't mean he doesn't do something unusual in order to get you to stop, because we're so busy taking care of the needs in front of us, and God has to do something a little bit extraordinary in order to get us to focus on what it is that he wants us to hear. The Lord said in verse 7 that he had indeed seen the misery of the people, of his people in Egypt. And, the people had been crying out to him for a long time. And God tells Moses that he had heard their misery. He had heard their crying. The world that we live in today, there's a lot of misery. There's a lot of things that are symbolic to what Israel was going through when you take a worldwide perspective of society today. And I think one thing that would do good is if God could hear his people calling out to him. Because if we're not calling out to him, the message we're sending to God is, hey, we're content, we're happy. It hasn't got to a high enough level yet that it's, interfering with our life. But when you see the uncertainty and the unrest that is going on in the world today, I think it has reached the point that it deserves that we as Christians cry out to God to get his attention in order that perhaps he might come and rescue us like he did his people from the Egyptians. I think the prayer for the day ought to be, God, come rescue us and to save us from this oppression that we're experiencing here on this earth. We go on, we see that he said he had come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Of course, this is symbolic of when Jesus will take us to heaven, that he'll call us out of a place of misery and take us to a place where we would refer to it as heaven. To Israel, the land that flowed with milk and honey was their promised land. It's what God said he had promised to Abraham and Isaac and to Jacob, and he was ready to deliver on that promise. But he needed somebody to go and tell his people to get up and to get ready and to be paying attention, because God was coming. And he was going to pick Moses. Maybe that's a symbolic message for us. Are we a Moses that God is picking out to go and send a message to the people, a message of deliverance, a message of hope, a message that God has not forgotten us, and a message that God has heard our cry? Maybe God has somebody that he wants you to go to and deliver that message to, that there's a place called heaven compared to that place called heaven, Israel, that they dealt with here, on earth. Maybe God has somebody that he wants you to go and tell about a land that is possible for them to go to also. But he needs a messenger that would go and deliver it and not be afraid. We'll talk more about the characteristics of that messenger the next time we meet.